Good morning. Very nice to see you all again. Now we're going to do something extremely fun.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
Oh, I think I'm having what the Germans call a Schadengasm.
Where do they teach you to talk like this? In some Panama City sailor want a hump bar? Or is this getaway day and your last shot at his whiskey? Sell crazy someplace else. We're all stocked up here.
I believe it or not, I watch my words very carefully. There are those that think I'm a very stable genius, okay?
Hey, fellow artists, welcome to the live stream. It's been a couple weeks. I took last week off because I was just too busy doing some last-minute holiday work for people, as you do when you're a caricature artist or an artist in general. So I hope everyone had a really nice Christmas holiday if you celebrate that sort of thing. We had a nice time. My wife and I, Debbie, we stayed at home and did Christmas Eve and a gift exchange via Zoom with the siblings and family. And it was fine. It was still a good time, I think. It wasn't like weird or anything. It's just, what we have to do right now. I think next year this time we'll be probably back to normal. Yeah, it's a chilly, nice winter day here in San Diego. I've actually got my woolly pulley on because it's kind of chilly. And today we're going to talk about the human ear. It's the feature that honestly I think is like the most fun to draw. I love drawing ears and painting ears because it's kind of easy once you understand and know the anatomy. And the cool thing about the ear is that it doesn't change. It doesn't with facial expressions like the mouth or the eyes, which change drastically based on the expression. The ear is static. It does not change. So once you know it, you know it. And everyone's ear is based on the exact same template. Everyone's ear is the same with just minor variations in, the details, basically. So I think it's a real fun thing to draw. If you do it good, it's like very impressive to people because it looks very complex. But if you don't know your ear anatomy, I look at someone's portrait or caricature and the ear is just a mess, like a conglomeration of just random looking shapes. I can tell they don't know their ear anatomy. It's really, really obvious when someone doesn't know their ear anatomy. Anyway, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the forms of the ear, its proportions, where it sits on the head, and the names of the things. So you're going to come away with a lot of knowledge today, I think. Let's say hi to some people in the stream. We got Praveen, welcome. Hey, Alan, good to see you. And Sargon and Morad, hello. So yeah, feel free to chime in on the chat and pose questions. Anything you want to talk about, feel free to bring up, even if it's not ear related, and I'll try to answer them. Debbie will be here in a minute to talk about some of those things to help with the chat. All right, so let's take a look at our workspace here. All right, let's first look at the anatomy. I've got a couple diagrams here. This one on the top is from the Stephen Peck book on human anatomy for artists, and I love his diagrams. They're really, really cool. But I had to add some of my own terms, I think, that he was missing, the stuff I got from other books, because, like I said last time, it's strange, like you can't really find one single art book that has, like, very totally complete diagrams with complete labeling of all the names. The Peck book has a lot of the some of the older names for things, like more vernacular type terms for the anatomy, which is why I tend to like the Elliot Goldfinger book on human anatomy more, because it uses more standardized Latin names for things. And the diagram beneath that is actually from the Charles Barg drawing course, which is this book that was republished from an old academy training course from like the 19th century. And he has really, really cool diagrams. They're nice, simple, like 2-value drawings, and they break down the forms very, very easily. So the Barg book is pretty good to have. It's sort of instructive, and it shows you how artists learned anatomy and drawing back in the 19th century. So, you know what? Before going over all these terms and stuff, I want to go over the simple anatomy, the basic forms, without talking about so much about the terms. So let's open a new document here. Okay. And this is the one thing, this is the golden nugget from this class, the waxy golden nugget from the ear that you can take away, and this will help you remember ear anatomy more than anything else I'll say today. This is it right here. The ear, the human ear, is essentially the letter Y inside of a question mark, and specifically the lowercase y. That's the ear. If you remember the Y and the question mark, you are golden. You are good. You will be able to draw any ear, because this is what the ridges of the ear form. So let's take a look at that, and let's break that down a little bit more simply, or show you what I mean. Okay, this diagram is opposite because the ear is pointing the other way. It's just a backwards Y and a backwards question mark. But essentially, you can see what I mean here, if you don't already know or can't tell. But the question mark is the outer structure of the ear. Here, let's see. I got this is a grayscale image. Of course, I got to convert this here back to color. So the question mark portion is the helix, and then the lobe is the dot. And the Y is the antihelix, this structure here. It's these ridges that form the main structures of the ear. And everything else is basically a concave shape, or a hole, or a depression. And it's basically the same from different angles. If you look at the ear from different angles, it'll just be in different proportions. And we're going to show some examples of ears from different angles shortly. Let's move that camera a little bit. So let's go over the anatomy here. So as I said, the main structure of the ear, the outer ridge, is called the helix. And helix is just a general term for any kind of spiral, but it originates, or it starts, at the floor of the concha. The concha is the deepest part of the ear. It's like the bowl where is the most internal part of the ear. So it starts here at the crus of the helix and spirals outward, goes upward and outward, and then back downward again. And all this portion is everything that's not the earlobe is cartilage. So you can see the picture of the cartilage here on the right side. All of this is rigid cartilage, and the only part of the ear that's basically fatty tissue is the lobe itself. This is why your ears basically are all the same, and they don't really change. They do grow over time, though, because the cartilage in your face will continue to grow over time. So your ears will get bigger and the tip of your nose will get bigger as you get older. All right, so the next main structure is the antihelix. Again, it's just the Y-shaped structure, and it's a Y because these are these two ridges that insert at the anterior superior portion of the helix, and then they come together to form this ridge right here, which is the main body of the antihelix. And the notch in between this sort of triangular depression is called the triangular fossa, or fossa triangularis. And then the depression that's formed between the helix and the antihelix is called the scapha, right here. And that just runs all the way along from top all the way down to the earlobe. The little notch of skin, or the growth of skin that covers the auditory meatus, or the ear cover hole, the ear hole, is it's called the tragus, and that's this form right here. And opposite that is the antitragus, and that sits at the very base of the antihelix, and that's right here. And the space that's in between this notch is just generally called the ear notch or the intertragal notch. And that's the portion right here. I guess I'll do it in a different color, this little area right there in green. So that's it for the main structures. You might find some other smaller structures on the ear. A lot of people have a tubercle on the helix in this area right up here. And if you remember from the mouth lesson, a tubercle is just any kind of small fleshy growth on a larger form. So the tubercle of the upper lip, any flap of skin. So you can see this on some people, but not all. They'll have a tubercle right there. So if you do see it in an ear on a photo, it's not your imagination. It's an actual structure in common. That's just part of the cartilage. The tragus also, which is this fold of skin, this little protuberance covering the auditory meatus right here. Some people have a double tragus, meaning two bumps for the tragus, and some just have one. I just have one, for instance, but you'll see some pictures today of people that have two bumps for the tragus. And the other thing to be aware of is just the shape of the lobe when people are when you're drawing people. Some people have what's called a free earlobe that dangles off the side of their face. And some people have an attached earlobe where it's basically a straight line that continues from the back of the helix all the way down into the jawline. It's just one continuous straight line. And so that's a common variation you'll see among people. So that is it. I mean, that's a lot of information in a little amount of time, but it's not really that complicated. And again, I guess when you get flustered or confused about what you're seeing when you're looking at an ear, just remember that letter Y inside of the question mark. So let's see if there are any questions. Praveen asks, is there a book available on Riley's method? There's a few books here and there that talk about it, but there's never been a really good complete book on the Riley abstraction. So I can't really help you on that. Maybe somebody's working on one. I always hear talk about people from the Watts Atelier, like the teacher there, or some of the teachers there getting together to create a Riley book, but I don't know if they're ever going to do that. So, the best advice on that is just search it out on YouTube. I have one video that deals with the Riley abstraction in my Proko caricature course, and it's using the abstraction in caricature. And in the premium version, the version of the course you purchase on the Proko website, I go into a lot of in-depth detail about the abstraction, how it's formed, why the rhythms are the way they are, what the anatomy is that it's based on, and the overall philosophy of it. But the free YouTube version, you can get the gist of what the abstraction is and how I use it for caricature. All right, so let's look at some ear examples here. I've got a lot of old photos here. These are from my old course when I taught it at the Atelier. And I like a lot of these because they show the ear from different angles and in strong lighting situations. What you want to avoid when you're doing ear studies is photos like these. This is a page of bad ear photos, meaning the lighting's not great. It's just soft. I think it's like outdoor lighting with no strong cast shadows, and it makes the forms harder to interpret. So just beware of that. I just wanted to show that as an example of bad ears to study when you're doing anatomical studies. These are all really good because they just have a strong single light source that casts a strong shadow. And because the thing about the ear and making the forms look realistic is the control of your values and the edges between them. It'll show where there's a ridge, where there's a drop off, where there's a sharp plane, where there's a soft plane, such as, you know, the antihelix is a good example of this edge variation. And it's not always obvious in every single photo you'll see, but generally the lower leg of the antihelix right here. Of course, I gotta convert this back to RGB here. The lower leg of the helix, and I'm sorry, the antihelix is generally sharper, has sharper edges than the upper leg. The upper leg is going to be softer, flatter, smoother edges, and won't have as, say, sharp edges. So things like that are going to help your ear rendering when you understand that. Another thing I didn't really discuss is the ear from like behind, or actually even from the front. Let's take a quick look here too. I wanted to point this out because it's something which, you know, you should see. If you don't see it, it might hurt your drawing. But the overall shape and structure of the ear from the front is that you can see the helix here creating this single sort of almost like an S curve all the way down to the bottom here. But then the antihelix pops out at the midpoint in front of that. And so it breaks up the ear into these sort of these three segments, or these three bumps. We got one bump here, another bump there for the antihelix, and another bump for the earlobe. So it has sort of these three distinct concave structures when you're looking at it from the front. When you're looking at the ear from the rear, things get a little interesting too. Let's see if I have, yeah, I have one here, I think. And it's not the best example of it. It's not super clear, so I'll exaggerate the idea a little bit here, but the ear from the rear is basically an S curve. And it creates a sort of shape like this from the top of the helix all the way down to the lobe. And then you can distinctly see the bowl of the concha. And from the front view, the concha is a concave shape, but here it's more of a convex shape. And it's sort of like, makes the ear from the backside sort of look like the bell of a trumpet or of any kind of like a brass instrument, where it's like you're looking at the outside of a bowl, basically, a bowl shape. And then as the ear turns around in space, you'll see the curvature of the helix more prominent. And I don't know if I have a great photo of that. Yeah, here's one that sort of shows that. This one here. So as the ear turns around and you start to see it coming around to the front view, you'll see the helix shape pretty prominently. So you'll see it actually attached to the front plane of the face, and then it spirals around, it comes back in front of itself, and then you got the lobe down here. And then the bowl shape of the concha from the rear. Okay. And in context, too, on the face, I should probably bring this up as another point. The ear sits, the front plane of the ear doesn't sit straight up and down. If you're looking at the human skull here, from the side view, it's a bit oblong. It looks something like so. There's the center line of the skull, the midpoint. The ear sits just behind the midpoint, or the auditory meatus, I should say, sits just behind that. That's the ear hole where the sound goes in. And the front plane of the ear is roughly parallel to the ramus of the mandible, the back of the jaw bone, basically. It's just a continuation of that line. So it sits at an angle relative to the face when it's a straight up and down view. And also, the front plane of the ear will generally mimic and be parallel to the front plane of the nose, which is parallel to the jawbone. So, fun little things to think about when you're drawing the ear in context. Also, the top of the ear will generally line up with the brows, and the bottom of the ear lobe will line up with the base of the nose. And it's kind of a bad drawing, but you get the idea. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the general proportions of the ear itself. And this can help a lot when you are doing a free-handed drawing of the ear, or even, an ear in context on the human face. The ear can actually be broken up into 3 sections that are roughly equal, just into thirds. So, top of the helix here, and I'm just sort of making this up, I'm not looking at any one particular ear, but the top third is generally where the bottom leg of the antihelix is, and where it overlaps the concha right there. And then there's the triangular fossa, the helix running parallel to the back shape of the ear here. And then the bottom third is generally where the antitragus and tragus dip into the ear notch, like so. So the antitragus is usually the good landmark for the bottom third, and the lower leg of the antihelix is the marker for the second third right here. And you will find people that differ from this these proportions a little bit, but it's just like with the equal thirds of the measurements of the face, it's just a good place to get started. So that is it. We crammed all of that into the first 15 minutes or so here, 20 minutes. So let me know if you have any questions about that. I know it's a lot, but from here on, we'll just basically do an ear study.
Oh, what did I miss?
Oh, you missed nothing. Don't worry about it.
Oh, okay.
So Pocket Broken says, what question mark and why thing? I'm not sure. Oh, yeah. Okay, German says the why and the question mark just blew his mind. And yeah, so Pocket, if you missed it, it's the structure of the ear is essentially the letter Y inside of a question mark.
And you can go over that when you do the study, correct?
Yeah. But there's the lowercase y, there's the question mark. Just remember that, and you'll always remember the structure of the ear. All right, so let's get a good ear drawing, ear study on here. Or photo, I should say.
So I guess this won't be in color since most of your ears seem to be in black and white.
No, I'm gonna. Well, I only have a couple photos of color ears, so yeah, I'm gonna paint it in color here. I'm gonna use this one. All right.
Yes, hello everyone.
Debbie's here.
It is a little chilly here for San Diego. It's about 61 degrees, which I think is like 16 degrees Celsius, 17 degrees Celsius. So not cold, but definitely a little cooler than usual, and very cloudy.
Yeah, we like it though.
Yeah.
So with any digital painting, I generally like to coat the canvas, cover the white of the canvas right away. I don't like to paint on a white surface. Sometimes I do a little bit more gray, keep it more neutral. That's okay too. Generally on the warm side, reddish, brownish, gray. So that's my preferred color. Get out my sketching pencil here. So first, I'm just going to estimate the general size, the height and width of the ear. That's the main thing first, is just get the general proportions in, and then I can mark off the proportions more specifically as I go. But I want to get the front plane of the ear at the angle that it's at. Okay, that generally feels about right. Let's divide it into thirds. 1, 2, 3. Let's see how equal that is. It's probably not very equal when I'm oh yeah, that's really off actually. Let's move this up a little higher. Okay, I'm just sort of measuring, like I'm bringing my finger up to the screen here with my Wacom. Can't really tell what I'm doing here, but there we go. Just trying to get my equal thirds. And this earlobe is kind of a blend between a free and attached earlobe. It's not totally free, but it's not totally attached. So it's somewhere in between. Okay. And so let's start at the legs of the antihelix, because that's one of our portion markers here, one of our thirds markers. And down to the antitragus, and then the intertragal notch. Up to the tragus, and it's a very nice, smooth single tragus. And I'm just outlining some of the plane changes here. Below the antitragus here, where it intersects with the earlobe, there's a bit of a downward or backward facing plane that has a softer or darker halftone there. All right, let's create the helix, the main structure of the ear. And the ear itself, there's two sort of technical terms you can use for the outer ear. One is called the auricle, A-U-R-I-C-L-E, or the pinna, or pinna, P-I-N-N-A. Both are sort of technical names for the outer structure of the ear itself. And this ear does have a slight tubercle, like I pointed out in the book here. A bit of a fleshy growth here on the posterior superior portion of the helix. And even like a slightly smaller one just below it as well, right there. All right. Then the crus of the helix, as it meets the bowl of the concha and divides it into an upper and a lower portion. Actually, I think comes down a little lower than that. There we go. Then I'm going to outline where the fossa triangularis is between the legs of the antihelix. Sort of dark depression right about there. And then the rear ridge of the antihelix, where it dips down into the area known as the scapha. And the plane change here is very soft and subtle up top when it's up high. Then as it gets lower, as it travels down, the curvature becomes more of a distinct cylinder. The shape of the antihelix is is sort of a tight little shape. So the form shadow will be of a sort of a tighter, smaller shape here. Okay, and then the helix here is a little thick, so I'm going to thin that up and refine the shape of that. Remember, the initial lay-in was just a really rough block-in and it didn't really represent the true anatomy of the ear. And here I'm trying to be a little more specific and careful about how I draw the shape of that in. Because just like with the nose, the eyes, and the mouth, the ear has a likeness. You can definitely tell the likeness of someone if they have really distinctive ears. Like if they're really large or have really distinct shapes to them. That is part of their likeness. So you do want to be accurate and not just take it for granted that you can just draw any ear shape on a person. When you're doing a portrait or a caricature, you want to be true to that person's features. And get rid of some of these guidelines here, getting rid of the thirds measurements. Okay. And that's roughly it there. So now I can actually block in some of the shadow patterns. This is a sort of more of a precise method here. I mean, I could just do it with paint, but I'm going to go ahead and do it with linear lay-in right now. So we got the cast shadow from the helix onto the antihelix beneath it. And the entire concha is within shadow. And then there's the entire scapha here. This depression between the helix and the antihelix is all in shadow. And there's some scattered light inside of there, some subsurface scattering, which creates sort of a glow, and maybe even some reflected light. So I'll take that into account. But everything else is basically just a light halftone, or light or dark halftone. So let's get to painting. Any questions, Debbie, that popped up?
No.
Cool. Okay, so let's get in a, I guess I'll get in the shadow colors first. Pretty dark. Pretty red. Right now I'm on a layer beneath the line art layer just to do this blocking of colors. Then I'm gonna paint opaquely on top of the line art pretty soon. And doing a bit of the shadow behind the ear, just to give it a, pop it off the surface a little bit. And that shadow is actually much more dull color. It's not as red as what's happening in the ear, because inside the ear you got all that subsurface scattering and reflected light. So it's definitely going to be a warmer color inside the ear, but outside the ear is going to be sort of a cooler, more neutralized shadow color. All right, let's find the average value in the lights here. Just sort of taking my best guess. I usually go a little bit darker with my initial halftones as well, just because, it's just a habit I'm in from traditional painting, where it's easier to lighten a color later on than it is to actually darken it. Because if you put a lot of light color with strong whites mixed into it, it's really hard to get a dark, rich color back when you're working with traditional media like oil paints. Okay. That's basically it. So I'll go on top of the line art layer now here, and just paint opaquely and cover up my lines.
So while you're kind of talking about colors, Alan Roll, I think I pronounced that right, has a question. Have you ever explored the trigonometric component to the U scale in the color wheel? Since the range goes from 0 to 360, each unit of color correlates with an angle. Are you familiar with that at all?
Nope. Don't even know what he's talking about. Sorry, Alan.
Looks like Alan needs to school us.
Yeah, why don't you have a lesson on that?
Yeah, can you have a stream, please? Yeah, I don't know what that is.
You mentioned the word trigonometry, I think, or a derivation of it.
Trigonometric?
Yeah, trigonometric.
So
yeah, I mean, I never got
trigonometry.
past like intermediate algebra, so you're talking to the wrong guy when you mention math stuff.
I took trig. We called it trig. I didn't care for it.
Oh, the cool math kids called it trig.
Yeah. And calculus, I took calculus. I hated that even more. And I don't think I've ever used calculus. I might have used trig, though, in very basic usage.
All they really need to teach kids in school that, that don't want to go on to do like science or math itself is just, you need, your arithmetic. You need to be able to do percentages and fractions. And that's all you need in life. You don't need anything else. No one has ever needed find X in their daily life.
Not true. I mean, I use algebra a lot.
How do you use algebra in your daily life?
To figure percentages and things like that.
Well, like I said, to figure percentages, what, that's algebra? That's not algebra, is it?
It can be.
Okay. I mean, because, yeah, every now and then you need to figure out a percentage of something, or it's good to know the percentage of something. But you can do that with just a quick formula. I just always forget what that formula is. But if that formula was beaten into me at a young age, I would have remembered it still.
But that's algebra.
Is it?
If it's a formula, most likely. If it's a formula where you're trying to find out what x equals, then...
No, I remember learning about fractions when we studied geometry, like before like algebra.
Well, anyway, Alan goes on to say, you can use this for chromatic harmonies. For example, the complementary color add or take 180, and then 12 for triadic harmonies. Or 120, sorry, 120 for triadic harmonies. Praveen says calculus was his favorite.
Oh,
So
man.
if we ever need any calculus help, Praveen will have to do a stream on that.
Oh man, I always hated math. It was my worst subject.
I think it was derivatives or something. I don't know. I remember after every calculus test, I would have a horrendous headache.
Hmm. The photo here is fairly high contrast. And in real life, if I was painting from a real model, I would probably see a lot more subtleties in these colors. So I might paint this a little more subtly than I see it here in the photo. Because if I stick exactly to what I see in the photo here, it might end up looking a little too, well, photographic. So yeah, it's just something you want to be aware of in when painting from photo reference. Anytime you paint from photo reference, really. Whatever the subject be, there's always going to be more subtleties, more reflected light. The contrast won't be quite so great in real life. See, even a bit of yellow here. Yeah, but all that stuff about color harmonies and angles on the color wheel, I don't know, that seems to, like, to me, that just always complicates things and it turns me off, and I don't want to learn about color when it's presented that way.
Too technical for you?
Yeah, and I think it's unnecessary because I don't think it can be necessarily broken down into like charts and graphs and angles, math, because there's certain things that are just, you have to go from your gut and from your intuition, and but based on good experience, good observation, and an understanding of a few key concepts, which I went over in my color theory live stream a few months ago. If you just, as long as you have a good control and understanding of the hue, the value, and the saturation of a color or its chroma, you're good to go. And if you understand what kind of lighting you're looking at and what statement you want to make with the color, like how colorful you want to be as an artist, understanding those things about yourself is the most important thing, because then you'll pick colors as a response to how you want to define the world in your painting.
But I think it depends how you learn, because some people learn better with facts and figures that they can memorize and then make their own.
Yep.
So I think it really just depends.
But honestly, the artists I talk to who I admire the most when we talked about color are also very intuitive with it. They say, yeah, we never did, I never did those color charts, or I hated those. They don't, or studying the color wheel, or talking about triadic color composition, the ways of grouping color into different organizational systems. They don't use any of that. It's just not something that helped them, other than maybe an abstract understanding of it does, but it's not something you hold up to your painting. I mean, I don't really know, I guess, how people who paint that way, how they actually use charts, really, color charts and grids and things like that. I don't want to poo-poo it too much. It's just, that's not helpful to me, and the artists that I've talked to don't really use it. But yeah, you got to go with what makes sense to you as an artist. If that appeals to you and that speaks to you more, I guess, then go for it. But don't put too much emphasis on knowing things like that as like the cure-all. Sort of like with the abstraction, the Riley abstraction. It's just knowing it. It's just one tool in your tool belt. It's not something that's going to make you do great art. But it can help you when you get stuck. It's just a good fundamental skill to have, or an understanding to have.
I have a question here from David Sloss. I don't recognize that name. So welcome. He's enjoying the demo and wants to know what the difference between chroma and saturation is.
They're interchangeable. I said it one after the other like that. But yeah, when I say chroma, that's the saturation of a color. Saturation is just a term that's more understood by people, I think. Chroma, is something that's not, brought up as much in common speech. So, yeah. So first I said chroma because that's more technical. That's the way I, understand it. But yeah, saturation is the same thing.
Hopefully people can't hear that little motorbike going by.
Yeah, always after Christmas, there's kids get their new toys that they drive around the neighborhood.
Yeah, apparently a couple kids got mini bikes and they are basically just doing laps around the neighborhood nonstop. I think that would drive me crazy. I'd be so bored as a kid, but they seem to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, I don't think people can hear it with these microphones. But
Yeah, that's good.
we are hearing this like every 30 seconds because it's a pretty small street, and it's just motorbike. Like it's a mini motorbike, and they look ridiculous. The kids themselves are probably 13 years old, and these bikes are like the size of like, I don't know, what are they the size of? They're like a foot tall. So
maybe
they're like
a toddler's tricycle.
yeah, it's like a toddler tricycle, maybe even smaller.
But it has two wheels. Yeah. Yeah, they're even smaller because we had mini bikes when I was a kid. Of course, my mother wouldn't let us near them, but some of the neighbor kids had them, and they were bigger than these. These are really tiny. Oh, there he goes again. At least he's got a helmet on, so that's good.
Okay, so I'm paying attention a little more now to the edges, where forms are more rounded, where they're harder and crisper. And I'm just using my noisy fuzz brush for my brush set here. Nice blending brush, does good soft effects without being too soft. I haven't gone for my full value yet. I haven't gone to the lightest lights just yet. I'm sort of holding off on those until I get more of the darker colors, the halftones, figured out more before I put the final highlights on. And you can put your highlights on early on if you want, because it can help you figure out the full range of values and to work within them. Just for me, it's not really necessary, and I might end up just covering up the highlight anyway, because it's still in, you know, sort of an early stage of the painting where I might end up just having to cover it up because I'm still building and sculpting the forms of the halftones. So the ear you'll see a lot of really great saturated colors in places because the skin is thin and the blood's right underneath the surface, and the forms are really thin, so light will shine through them and create these really intense colors sometimes. Especially when the ear is backlit, you'll see the orange or redness coming through the backside. And that's a fun effect to have if you're in the right lighting situation. Yeah, you can maybe even push some of the effects a little bit. Like I might throw a slightly stronger coarse shadow, for instance, running down the back border of the helix here. Because the very back portion of the ear, the earlobe here, I'm sorry, the helix will have some reflected light coming back into it. And so the darkest portion of the helix will be maybe this this coarse shadow right here. Get sort of a transition color between the coarse shadow and the halftones here, sort of a orangey yellow color. Because something like this is basically it's like a cylinder. It's a cylinder that just happens to be a little bit warped and curved. So just treat it like you would simple geometric forms at first, and then you can add a little bit more complexity as you go. Bit of reflected light on the the helix here as it dips down into the concha as well. When I am doing an ear in context, though, on the human head, if it's in part of a portrait, I definitely won't go into this much detail. This is just, remember, an anatomical study of the ear, so I'm going into way more detail than I normally would. The cool thing about understanding and knowing ear anatomy, or the anatomy of anything, is you can convincingly simplify it when needed. So you don't need to go into all this detail. You can just suggest these forms or do them in a very quick way. And as long as you know what you're doing, it will read correctly, no matter how simply you do the rendering. But again, yeah, so don't take this as an example of how to do ears in context. Unless you want to be a super, super hyper-realistic painter, then yeah, you might spend a lot of time making every bit of the anatomy look just as rendered as everything else. But generally, you don't want to draw too much attention to the ear. So, because the eyes generally are more interesting, or the mouth, as far as features go when looking at it on the on a portrait. So yeah, just keep that in mind. You kind of want to learn this knowledge so that you can set it aside when necessary, and just kind of glaze over it. And as long as you're not breaking the rules and doing anything weird, that's really the best use of this type of anatomical knowledge. You just don't want the ear to distract because it looks badly done. Okay, let's get that last sort of layer of highlights on here. Maybe I'll get my spicy subtle shader here because it has a lot of cool texture on it and can help simulate skin tone or skin texture. So basically all these forward-facing planes get the brightest light because that's where the direction of the light is coming from. The plane's, facing to the right in the picture.
All right, I have some questions for you.
Sure.
If you're ready.
Yeah.
Lucas Sostak says he sees the shapes of the ear almost exclusively as curved lines. Do you ever redesign it with more sharp shapes for humorous or dynamic effect, or do you stay true to the curvy shapes when you're doing a caricature?
Yeah, that's more of a style choice, I think. And yeah, generally I do tend to, when I'm doing my lay-ins and my block-ins on anything, I tend to go a little more straight in my construction lines, because I just learned over time and experience that I tend to, as the drawing or painting progresses and I spend more time on it, things get naturally more curved and rounded as I go. And if you start out too rounded and curved, you might lose any sense of structure, or bones or hard straight edges underneath, because the underlying construction was too curvy. So yeah, I err on the side of straighter lines at first, I think. I don't know if I did on this one because I was doing an anatomical study up close, trying to get all the contours, so this might have been a little bit more on the curvy, organic looking side. Let's shrink this down a little bit, see how it looks. Yeah, when it's an ear study like this, when you spend a lot of time on it, it can look overly rendered and like too much attention is paid to certain details. So I like to shrink it down like this, so it looks really small. And then I might maybe make some choices to simplify things. Like I can see now that these halftones on the earlobe are a little too dark, so I'm lightening those up because they're just too distracting. And anything else that's, calling too much attention to itself, I'll just simplify a little bit more now. Blending and softening some edges. And if an edge needs to be harder, I might make the edge harder at this point as well. But yeah, there's a lot of little reflected light areas here, rim lighting and lighting effects that in context would look a little bit too distracting in a real portrait. So just for the sake of getting a good looking ear, I'm just simplifying it a little bit here. So it's becoming less of an ear study, like an anatomical study, and more of like an ear portrait, which is, I think, a little bit more of a casual approach.
So I have another question for you from Murad. The question is, what do you think is best, studying the features separately or doing a full portrait all at the same time?
Well, I think it's good to, if you're unfamiliar or not confident with the features, do studies of the features just by themselves, because it takes a bit of the pressure off and you can focus on just learning that thing for that day. And then you don't have to go back to it again. You can just spend one day on ears, and you've got it. You've got ears after that point. You know, maybe a couple more practice drawings. But then, then study the nose and the eyes and the mouth individually, out of context. Just understand their generalized, idealized structure and how to create them. And then put them into practice on a real face. It's kind of like, practicing scales with music. You got to practice your scales before you can put them together into a real song or a composition. You got to know where the notes are, what they do when you press them. And then, on the piano, for instance. And then you can put it all together, put all the complexities together from the simple building blocks. Okay, let's make this a little bigger again. All right. So that's basically it for this ear study right here. And we don't have a whole lot of time left. I wanted to do just about an hour today, like before, but let's just do like another linear drawing from a different angle. And I won't paint this one. I'll just sort of block it in, show you how I might do, how I might start that. So let's find one that's like from a
front view.
Like a front view. Yeah, that's a good idea here.
Since most of the time when you're doing portraits, that's how you usually see the ear.
Yeah. So here's a decent one here. This one on the left with the dark hair. Okay, let's get my sketching pencil out here. And yeah, again, this is just a block in. I'll show you sort of my approach for drawing those with the sort of the straight lines. So you want to just get the overall outer shape first, and then you can break it down into smaller shapes. And in this case, I can't really see all the divisions to draw it into the thirds. I could guess where the thirds are. I mean, from the top and the bottom, it's easy to divide something into thirds. So you might want to still do that if you are having trouble placing the proportions of the ear. Let's see if those truly are equal thirds here. Pretty close. The bottom third could be a little bigger. Okay, so the main structure we see here is the front of the helix as it dips down into the side plane of the head here. Then it dips in a little bit and curves outward and then back in again down towards the earlobe. Then the antihelix. The antihelix on this ear doesn't really pop out in front of the helix. It comes close, it comes right up to the edge there, and then dips back in at the top of the lobe. So not all antihelixes pop out in front of the ear at the helix, but some do, so beware of those. And then the tragus here, it's just below this lower third division. And then there's the bottom portion of the cartilage here below the antitragus has a sort of a darker halftone. And then everything else is, like the concha is all in shadow here. So I'm going to just default to creating a pretty simple hard lined edge here for where the shadow is falling. Sort of making an executive decision as to where that shadow is. And then sort of block that in, creating a two-value drawing here so the forms are a little clearer.
I have a couple of comments while you're working on that. Armand says he was trying to learn with the Byrne Hogarth book,
Okay.
but it's extremely stylized and difficult to remember.
Yeah.
So this stream is helping him.
Oh, good. Yeah, I've seen the Hogarth book, and I'm not a fan of the guy's style. Everything's overly dynamic everywhere, and it's too much. It's too much dynamism.
Is that the book that's called Dynamic Drawing?
It might be. Like, that's probably, I guess that's his thing, yeah, like dynamic anatomy.
Because I've seen it, but I've never looked at it. It just always pops up in my feed
Yeah,
for some reason.
it's too much. Too dynamic. Not balanced, I don't think.
And then Alan asks, relating to feature studies, do you ever do studies of a specific person that you will be doing a caricature of?
No,
don't,
I mean,
do
my
you?
studies are just my drawings, my sketches, my caricatures themselves. So, I mean, I don't do realistic portraits of them, if that's what you mean, in preparation for a caricature. But that could be a technique. If that helps you, you can definitely look into that as a legitimate technique for understanding their likeness. Like, do an actual portrait of the person, and then and then do a caricature after that.
But if you're doing a caricature, say, of Obama, you wouldn't go and do a feature study of his ear and then do a feature study of his eye.
I
Ever.
wouldn't, because I don't think that's necessary for me to get good anatomy in a caricature, because after the caricature is designed, I apply my anatomical knowledge to those proportions. So I'll do his ears oversized and large, but I will stay true to the actual design of his ear, his personal unique ear shape. But that's because I do have a lot of practice with the features of the face. I mean, I taught it for years at the atelier, so yeah, it's not something I really struggle with. So, but if you do, go ahead. I mean, if you have an idea about something that might help you in your own drawing, in your caricature or anatomical studies, go ahead and do it, and that could be your legitimate technique for learning. So I'm doing this other ear from the front, from the other side here, because there's a pretty unique shape here. I like the way this looks. Got the helix. And I'm just going to approach this a little more quickly than the other ones. I'm not going to break it down into the thirds or anything. I'm just going to eyeball all my proportions. So in this case, the anti-helix does pop out quite prominently in front of the helix. And then you can see the tubercle on this ear, on the rear portion of the helix, this little bump right here in the back. And the flap of the tragus here coming in front of the concha. Then the lower portion of the antihelix blending into the forms of the earlobe. Here's the lower leg of the antihelix dipping behind the helix. And then all that just creates a bit of a cast shadow right here.
I know we're almost done, so I have one, probably a last question. Kent Nelson wants to know, do you have a video of you talking about and using your Kojo brushes? What brush you use for what reasons? Have you done that?
Yeah, well, right when I premiered those brushes for, sale on Gumroad and on my website, I did a video, I did a live stream using every single brush and talking about each one. I can't remember the date of that, but if you remind me in the comments below, ask about that, and I'll go find the video and I'll post a link in the comments for this video I'll post a link to that exact video, like the date that it was. Otherwise, you can just look on my playlist, all my live stream playlists, and it's I think the actual the title of that might have been something to do with my digital brushes that I created. But yeah, I did a whole live stream dedicated to those brushes and explaining them. Okay, let's add the shadow areas to this ear. There's a real thin shadow running along the anti-helix here that drops down from it. It's being cast by the helix above it. And a bit of a shadow here at the bottom of the anti-helix where it meets the rear lower portion of the helix. And then the earlobe here. And again, just a quick two-value study here, just a light and a dark. Alrighty. Any other questions or
There's
comments?
one last question from Lucas. Is the Riley method of any use when drawing a caricature asymmetrically?
Oh, of course, yeah. The only thing is, if you've got a really asymmetrical face, like some people have really crooked eyes or they're doing a crooked smile, smiling expression, just be aware of it. And when you are doing your Riley rhythms, you can definitely use those rhythms to create a non-symmetrical shape. You just have to be aware of when you're doing it, when you want to do it, and how much. Because usually, the traditional way of using the Riley abstractions is to create a very symmetrical structure that's in perspective. Yeah, it can be definitely used for that. It's just to help guide your drawing, and it's just like a simplified version, like a simplified wireframe of what you intend to do. So yeah, for sure, you can definitely use the Riley abstraction for that purpose.
That sounds like a possible upcoming live stream topic.
Yeah, maybe. So that's it for today, guys. If there's any other questions you think of later, please leave them in the comments. And again, for that, we'll try to either in the description or in the comments link to my my personal brush set live stream where I talked about those brushes. And with that, I think that's about it. So stay tuned for the next one.
Next week?
Next week. Hopefully next week. We'll see. That's it. So yeah, enjoy everybody. Have a safe New Year's celebrations. As always, be safe and keep drawing, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.